Okay, so this shouldn't look strange to you. This is that worksheet that we did for basic economic systems. We looked at the 5 common goals and the 5 questions that every economy has to answer. What we're going to do is we're going to look at the command system, and then we'll go ahead and take a look at the market system. Again, this shouldn't look strange to you. This was the other worksheet we did there. So we're going to take a look at the things that the command system can do. And believe it or not, it looks like it should be a perfect system, right? Remember, socialism is the public ownership of all resources, and the government goes ahead and tells us what we do to answer all those questions. Now, it came from a book that was written, the Communist Manifesto. As a matter of fact, capitalism doesn't even come in as a word until this book brought it in. Now, part of the Communist Manifesto, and remember, communism is a political system, but the socialist economic system works very well inside the communist political system. So that's why sometimes you hear people confuse socialist with communist or try to use one versus the other. Because remember, communism is the government makes sure that the people have all, and the people are all the government and all this kind of stuff. But basically it's government control, which is why our command system works very well. Socialism works very well inside of the communist political system. Now, when we look at it, part of that manifesto comes up with a couple of things. First off, in the manifesto it states, everyone is equal. Now, think about that. Are you equal with everybody else, or are there differences? Problem number one that pipes up there. Everyone should be satisfied in the socialist economic system. Well, take a look at North Korea, Cuba, and Venezuela and tell me about that. Now, another thing, here's where we start taking a look at resources. Only labor produces value, not capital, not land. So owners of land and capital, because they're getting payment for using their land to grow crops, their buildings to manufacture stuff, and capital, the machines they have on the farms or in the manufacturing buildings, that the entrepreneurs own, shouldn't be making money. But because they are making money and only labor provides value, then people that own capital and people that own land must be stealing money from labor. So now we start coming up with another thing of who owns what and why. But we take a look at these right here, and there's a little bit of, well, maybe this isn't exactly a good thing to look at. Now, what I want you to do is I want you to go ahead and get the note sheet that looks like this. Because in theory, the command system or socialism looks like it should work great. And here's why. Because remember, first off, the government decides everything through the Central Planning Board. Remember, we went ahead and put that in there. So those shouldn't be anything new. It's just this is where they focus up on this model. Now, producers make all the stuff. They go ahead and take a look at what we can produce, all right? Because consumers want stuff. So here's what happens. The consumers, through questionnaires, surveys, whatnot, and everything else, tell the government what I need and want. In other words, the willing and able. So all of this information of what the consumers want goes to the Central Planning Board. The businesses tell the Planning Board, this is how much we can produce. So if you think about it, you've got people saying, hey, this is what I'd like, this is what I can do, and the Planning Board goes, all right, this is what we're going to make, and this is who's going to get it. So that they can make sure everybody gets an equal amount. Okay, so it's fair. So they'll establish the production targets and transmit that to the producers. The producers will then take those production targets and make the goods and services that the consumers will be able to buy. Now this looks pretty good. I mean, think about it. How efficient can you get? You got people saying this is what I want. You got a producer saying this is what I can make. And it's very simple. You put it all together and you got a group of folks saying they want this. Nobody can get everything. So we're going to try to get as many people as much as we can and make it as fair as we can. So we know what we can make, we know what they want, we put it together and we say make this happen. What I need, what I can make, what you're going to make, I produce it, customers get it. That's kind of where we're going with this, and it looks like it's a great theory. It looks like it should be very efficient in how we do it. And remember, theory's great until we bring people into it. Now let's take a look at the first really large socialist economic system in the world, and that was Russia / the Soviet Union. Now let's take a look for some historical view. World War I, 1914, 1917, Russia was in there, and they were basically a third world power, all right? They were a developing nation, even though everybody thought they were this great, big, huge force. They didn't. They were truly and effectively one of the 1% and 99%. So if you ever want to see what 1% and 99% really is, take a look at Tsarist Russia. You had the Tsar, or king, you had his court, and you had the people that made sure that the government ran, including military generals and that kind of stuff. They all had anything they wanted. Then you had the 99%. They called them serfs, or that was another word for slaves. So you had the king and you had the slaves. Anyway, during World War I, Russia just lost immensely because they couldn't compete with the more efficient and mechanical German armies and those kind of things. So millions of people died. And then in 1917 they had a revolution. And they actually had a democratic type of government formed at that particular point, but they made one mistake. They said, we want to stay in the war. That created another revolution and led to a civil war between 1918 and 1921. As a matter of fact, this is why a lot of folks in Russia still don't like us, because we took part in the other side civil war, right? Not the Bolsheviks, but what they called the White Russians, not the Red Russians. So we were actually over there fighting against the government that soon got formed. So there's a reason for that little bit of hate that they have for us over there. So the Civil War lasted, so from 1914 to 1921, they were basically at war. Their population in 1914, 175 million, in 1921, 130 million. 45 million people died through that, but not all through combat, most through disease and starvation. Right? The 1%, the 99%, well, they had 20 million, which would be middle and upper class, and you had 110 million serfs. This was what was left over. Right? The serfs got hit more than the 1% did. The economy was destroyed. Immediate action was needed. Now, Lenin took the reins, but he died in 1924, and Stalin comes into power in 1924. So he goes ahead from one to the other. Now, as they were kind of cementing their power after they won in 1921, it took a while for them to get into the economy mood, and they came up with what was called 5-year plans. And they would work these 5-year plans all the time. It was always the newest 5-year plan. Now, the first one, which was from 1928 to 1933, the economy grew almost 50%. Producer goods grew 137%. Electric power, 227% increase. But you got to watch out for percentages. Because remember, we said Russia was a developing country, and the Soviet Union was a decimated country left over from the developing country before 1914. There's electric power that they had. That's the 227% increase. Ask for numbers so you can get a good comparison. Don't look at percentages, ask for the numbers. But anyway, everything started growing. The key thing is the growth rates were high, even through World War II, when Germany was basically destroying the Russian economy. Russia's economy was growing. And they had a continued emphasis on military investment in the 50s and 60s. Lenin comes to power, Stalin took over. This is what the production possibilities curve looked like. Okay? Not too hot on consumer goods, really big on heavy industry, electrical power, and military, or capital goods. So, that was their first 5-year plan. Here's what happened later on. In the 60s, the West was widening the gap between what the people had and what people could do to the Soviet Union and the Eastern Bloc in Europe and China, that all of a sudden people couldn't do. Right? Kind of like in the 1980s, if you wanted to buy a car in the Soviet Union, you bought one that was basically a 1950s version of something we had. You had to pay them the money up front, and you got the car about 18 months later. So a little bit, a little bit of a problem here when you start talking about consumer goods. You're going to go down to the dealership, give them $30,000 in cash, and then wait 18 months for your car? I don't think so. So this is where they started widening the gap. Consumer production was stagnant. Standard of living wasn't growing, and future prospects weren't looking too well. This is why, over basically an 8-month period, the number 2 superpower in the world disintegrated into 16 different countries, literally without a shot being fired, because the economy of the country just crashed. Now, it took 75 years to happen in the Soviet Union. China just celebrated their 70th year under a socialist economic system. So, 5 more years, who knows? All right, now remember, we make decisions. Self-interest, information, habits, and models. We do all of this. Well, let's take a look at that model again and see how people and information might mess this up a little bit. All right, this is another worksheet, so go ahead and grab that out. Because you got to remember, we had 130 consumers with numerous different languages across a whole bunch of time zones with millions of products. By the way, that should say 10 time zones, not 9. All of this information coming into Moscow. All of these government industrial ministries. So we got millions of products, 130 million people all coming in, and you got to get it done quick. I mean, we can't even test the United States for different medical viruses better than South Korea can, because of government systems that get in the way. Think about this going on, right? 5-year plan, that's what the Central Planning Committee comes in with. We're going to be looking at 3 specific basic problems. The first is the coordination problem. Right information to the right people at the right time to get things done right. So, you remember the game you played in elementary school? The teacher whispered something in this person's ear, then it went all the way around the classroom, and when it got to the last person, what happened? It wasn't anything like the initial discussion. Now that's just, say 20, 25 kids in a classroom, and they all know each other. What happens if we have 130 million people all across the country with 10 different time zones, and they don't speak the same language. What do you think ends up when all this information gets to Moscow? All of these people coming up here and going blah, 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 blah. And all of a sudden, we have to go ahead and make some assumptions. We have to filter out stuff. And unfortunately, what we're filtering out is we're filtering out what the consumers are telling us. Not only that, but the producers, hundreds of millions of products are coming up here. They have to filter some stuff out. So they're filtering what they're being told through their filters, the government ministry's filters, not what the producers and consumers are telling them. This is what we call the coordination problem. It's hard to go ahead and fix what we need to do if we're not getting the exact information from both the producers and the consumers. All right. 5-year plan now gets set with a lot of assumptions and filters of information from the consumers and the producers. And then we pass this down. Now, here's an interesting thing. Here's how the 5-year plan works. Year 1, we roll out the plan. Right? Big country, 10 time zones. So it's going to take a while to get it to go through all of the country. Year 2, we're working the bugs out, making sure everybody's actually on the same page, on the 5-year plan page. Year 3, ideally, the plan's in full swing. Year 4, we're now taking a look at how the plan is working from place to place. Year 5, we're gathering that information again so we can come up with a new 5-year plan. In the meantime, you are producing the same stuff, the same way, the same processes, with the same results for 5 straight years. What if something changes within that 5 years? How do we get the right information to the right people at the right time to get things done right with all of the stuff we just talked about, and the process is how it works out in reality? Remember, the process is theory and it looks perfect. But then we go ahead and actually try to put it in play, things happen. Think about the last time you went on vacation. You went ahead and you planned how the vacation would work. And almost as soon as you got in the car, something changed. And you had to modify it, because if you didn't modify it, your vacation wasn't going to work out the way you thought. Second is the incentive problem. Taking risks, the entrepreneurs, you, the managers, what are you going to do? Making things better, faster, and cheaper. What's your incentive to do it? Right? Our incentive problem. Now, let me kind of put you in a situation here. We're going to go ahead and say we have good old Ivan sitting here. And Ivan runs a manufacturing plant, makes light bulbs. Now, Ivan's the producer in that model, right? He's right here. Now I go ahead and one of these industrial ministries, tell Ivan this is how much Ivan has to make. And in this case, he has to make 1,000 full trucks of light bulbs every month. So Ivan makes the light bulbs, puts them in the truck. I've got a investigator there making sure that those boxes are totally filled up and the trucks are totally filled with boxes. So Ivan does that, and he's moving them out, moving them out, moving them out. And while he's doing that, I mean, he's the manager of a big manufacturing plant, which means he's got a really great place to live. His kids go to the best schools, because there's kind of a 2-tier system. You got the best schools and you got the schools for everybody else. His kids get to go to the best system. His wife gets to shop at the best grocery stores. Again, 2-tier system. There's the one that has whatever's left over, and then there's one that has all the good stuff. They get to shop at the good stuff. Every year they get 2 weeks vacation on the Black Sea. So they got a really good thing going compared to the workers. Okay? So, middle of the month, Ivan goes ahead and he notices that there's only 250 trucks that have left his plant. In 2 weeks, he's got to get 3 times that amount of trucks out of the plant. And he's scratching his head because if that doesn't happen, he gets fired. Because he has to meet the 1,000 truck quota. Now notice I said quota, because that's what I told him he needed to do. He needed 1,000 trucks full of light bulbs. He has to meet a quota. I didn't say anything about profit. As long as he makes a quota, he gets all his stuff. So he's scratching his head and going, my God, how am I going to get 3 times the amount of trucks out in the same time as I only did 250 trucks? I got to get 750 for the rest of the month. Well, of course, his wife comes to the rescue and says, well, did he tell you how big you had to make the light bulbs? Ivan goes ahead and looks at her, looks at the paperwork. No. So guess what? The next day, Ivan says his plant is going to be making for the rest of the month. Not just big light bulbs. Can you say floodlights? By the way, this is a real story. Okay? So the plant makes floodlights for the rest of the month. On the last day of the month, truck number 1,000 takes off. And here's the thing. Nobody wanted floodlights. Or at least that many. And I didn't tell him how much of each he had to do. I just said trucks. So what did they do with these floodlights? Well, they drove them a ways away from the plant, and they had this great big open field. They'd stop the truck, they'd unload the floodlights into the open field, and they'd drive off. Now, most of Russia is about at the same latitude as Montana. And Montana in the winter is kind of like cold, wet, and everything else. Can you imagine what's going on with all these floodlights in these cardboard boxes just left out in the open to the weather? Yeah, they were all ruined. Okay? Now, here is why. I don't care about the cost, I care about the output. Make your quota or you're fired. So, if I am doing this, the first thing that's going to happen is, am I going to tell the government exactly the least amount of stuff I need to make? Because remember, I'm fired. So the question is, might I tell them it's going to take me a little bit longer than normal to make this product, just in case something happens? A machine breaks down, I can't get it fixed right on time. I might stretch that time out a little bit. We call that putting slack into the production target. I may also pad the payrolls. In other words, I might have a few more people than I absolutely need. I also might have a few more machines, maybe a little bit bigger plant. All of this stuff, building up these extra resources so that I'm safely going to make that quota. I don't care about the budget, because all I have to do is make that quota. And here's where it gets even more interesting. You're a bright manager, and you go, wow, I got a better way of doing this. And you restructure it, and all of a sudden, you exceed your quota by 10%. And I'm up in Moscow going, yay! Make sure you do it next month, and the month after that, and the month after that. Or you're demoted or fired. If you do it better, they expect you to continue to improve things. Which means the status quo is safer for you. Just make your quota. Don't take any risks, because when you come up with better, faster, and cheaper ideas, Some of them may not work. That's going to get you fired. Some of them may work. Now they're going to say, well, you need to continue on, or you're going to get fired. Why put yourself through that headache? Just make your quota. Which means research and development goes down. This is one of the reasons why they were producing basically cars that were 1950 type cars when we were producing 1980 type cars in 1980. Research and development, it's safer not to do it. So, the second part, we're looking at incentives. First off, the incentive is quota, not profit. Don't take risks because you could get fired. All of that leads to inefficiencies, shortages, misallocation of resources, which focuses into that declining economy that the Soviet Union had. And the standard of living for the people started going to absolutely nothing. And remember, no idea that the future is going to look any better. Invisible hand's not allowed to work. Now, of course, the third one is the standard of living problem. This is where it finally built up so much that the Soviet Union disappeared inside of 8 months into 16 different republics. Standard of living problem. It all works for the people. How do we do that? Inefficiency leads to higher prices, bad for the people. Less goods and services, bad for the people, which leads to the lower standard of living. Again, bad for the people. Looks like a perfect product, but you have to start thinking what happens when we get people involved. All right, so consumers in the USSR. All of this stuff led to the reduction of the standard of living. Here's what your worksheet should look like, except right up here, this should say 10 time zones. Now, the paper that you're going to be signing is called the Putin Economic Exploration Paper, or the Putin paper. You'll see this in the module. Here's your article. Okay. Remember, read the questions, take a look at them. The facts, you're going to get 8 key facts out of here. Your 3 questions, this is section 2. Section 1, remember, is bullet facts. Section 2 are the bullet paragraphs. And then section 3, my questions. So there's 2 of those. So make sure you answer all of that. Take a good look at the Writing 101 on a paper, because it lists you out the 3 different sections again. So make sure you've done that. And go ahead and get this to me before next week. And that's all for the command system.